Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As Robin has intimated, I stand before you as a journalist and a politician. So some of you might think someone who is twice damned. At least until recently, only estate agents had a worse reputation. I suppose I should be grateful that, thanks to the current crisis, now bankers at the bottom of the league. However, I've always believed that both of my professions, if I can call them that, journalism and politics, can be used positively as instruments of change, working with people. Now, you might wonder, if I'm a journalist and a politician, what am I doing talking in a slot about non-governmental organisations? Well, as Robin mentioned, I was sent, rather unwillingly, I have to say, to Brussels in the 1970s. But while I was there, I not only worked as a journalist, but became the first secretary of the NGO Liaison Committee to what was then the European Communities, basically trying to bring different third world-oriented organisations like Oxfam and Trocura and others from all of the then EC member states to work with the European Union, as it later became, to make sure that development policy was actually getting to the people who needed it, and also that there was development education here in this country and other member states. Extremely important to get the public here on board about the importance of the sorts of issues which the two previous speakers have been talking about. Now, as a journalist, I am covering the G20 summit. I apologise in advance that I'm going to do that ultimate gaffe of speaking and running, because I then have to go and interview the Turkish Prime Minister and see how he feels things have been going. Now, a lot of people are, perhaps I don't say necessarily people in this room, but certainly some of those who were out on the streets in the City of London yesterday, see what's going on at the moment in essentially negative terms. And I can understand that, because we are at a period in which a development model has basically been exposed as the emperor with no clothes. It hasn't worked. And obviously there's a temptation then to enter a blame game, whether it's to say it's the bankers' fault, or the French and the Germans saying it's the Americans and the British fault, and you know, you get the story, you get the drift. But that's frankly not helpful. There's no point trying to put the blame for the problems of the present. Of course, we have to analyse and understand what has gone wrong, but what we need to do is look forward and to see how we can have, well, let's be frank about it, a better world, which is why I am here, why I'm so pleased to see Committee Room 14 full of people, I hope, looking forward to the future and looking forward to solutions, in which there is, I would argue, a need for a genuine new world order. Now, the new world order that often gets talked about in the press and indeed in the United Nations is basically a reshuffling of the pack of cards. Basically saying that, okay, up until now, 7 and then later 8 countries are the big boys in the world, they have the power, they have the share, extraordinary share of the wealth, and therefore they should make the decisions. And moving from G7 to G8 to G20, on the surface is good because it brings in other countries, emerging economies such as India, China, Brazil, Russia. So that in itself is a good thing. But if we just reshuffle the pack and say, okay, now there are 20 really powerful countries that are going to rule the world, that still leaves 172 on the sidelines. Moreover, do the governments of those 20 and the vested interests necessarily represent the interests of the people concerned? So I think what we have to do, not only in this meeting this afternoon, but I would suggest over the next few years, is to think very deeply about the shaping of the New World Order and what sort of New World Order we want. One in which people of different ethnic groups, different language groups, different religions, etc., can work together on the basis of common moral principles and goals. Now, I happen to be a Quaker, a member of the Religious Society of Friends, so I suppose place myself in the Christian community, but I've always been pleased that Quakers have believed that essentially one can learn truth from anywhere. And I've always, through interfaith dialogue, enjoyed meetings with Muslims and Jews and other Christians and Hindus and Buddhists, Baha'is, anyone, because I realise that everyone has some element of truth, and we should garner those truths in order to fortify ourselves for the struggle ahead. But that struggle is not, I would argue, going out into the streets and throwing computers out of the windows of the Royal Bank of Scotland. That's old-style politics, old-style radical action, and quite frankly, solves nothing. What we need is basically to re-establish a link between power and the people, which basically means that politicians, and indeed the media, are linked far more closely to what not only people around the world want, but what people around the world need. Now, I hope in my humble way, as a journalist and as a politician, as Robin said, hoping in the European Parliament from June, that I will be able to do my little bit. But every one of you in this room can do your little bit as well, not just by lobbying your MPs or writing to the newspapers, but also thanks to this wonderful, some people might think horrific, but I say wonderful new technology we have, whereby you can blog, you can tweet, if you're onto Twitter, you can comment on other people's blogs, make sure that the voice of the people and that your voices individually and as communities are heard. Because frankly, we have listened for too long and with too much respect to the people who we put on pillars, on pedestals. I can see them from my front window because I live in Tower Hamlets and Canary Wharf rears up like some extraordinary monument to late 20th century capitalism in front of me. But we know, every one of us in this room, that's not the real world that we want to work for. What we want to work for is where everybody, right around the world, poor, black, white, male, female, whatever, has opportunity in life, has access, and makes sure that their voice is heard. I wish you well. I apologise that I'm going to have to speak and run, but I will be with you in spirit as I sit there back at the G20 doing my work.